We're never going to live a life that we love unless we learn how to follow the guidance of the Holy Spirit. We have to be bold in order to follow the Holy Spirit. Everything that I'm doing today is a result of stepping out and doing things that I felt really strongly in my heart that God wanted me to do, but that I had no real proof of until I stepped out and found out. So I'm not at all suggesting that people just do a bunch of crazy, radical things that make no sense, but I am telling you that you're gonna live a very narrow life if you're so careful and so fearful of ever making a mistake that you won't ever step out of the boat and try to do anything else. Peter was the only one who walked on water, but he was the only one who got out of the boat. Everybody else stayed in the safe zone. And I still am amazed when I look back at some of the things that I felt like God led me to do, and I'm like, was I nuts? I mean, was I totally crazy? And yet I've seen in my own life what God can do through any plain, ordinary, simple-minded person who will open up their life to him and say, come on, God, let's get on with the plan that you have for my life and give me the courage to step out. Now, how do you learn to hear from God? Boy, that's a big one everybody wants to know. Somebody asked a minister that, one of these old guys, you know, that were so great that we get to read books about. Like someday maybe I'll be one of those old ladies that people read books about, I don't know. And he said, people want to know, they asked me, how did you learn how to hear from God? He said, the answer is by making mistakes. Come on. You take a step, and if it's a stupid one, it won't take long and you'll know it. But if you take a step, you really believe that's what God's leading you to do, you take a step and it just doesn't work, then all you got to do is step back and say, well, that's not the direction to go. You know, let's just say that maybe you really feel like you need a change in your life. You want to get a different job, you want to get a different career, but you're kind of afraid because you make good money, and so you just keep staying there because you're just like, well, you know, and you want to go, but you stay, and you want to go, but you stay. And so then pretty soon, because you're staying and not going, now you're starting to dislike everybody. You dislike the place, you don't like the boss, you don't like the work. Now you... So what I would do if I were you is pray, God, I feel like I need a change. Open a door for me. Now that doesn't mean you can just sit back somewhere and just wait for somebody to come along and say, I'd like to hire you in my company. But while you're praying and while you're not complaining and while you're loving God and serving him, you begin to look. You don't have to quit your job and not have one. You begin to look while you've still got this one, and if it's what you're supposed to do, God will open the right door for you, and you'll have peace about it at the right time. But I think so many people live such little lives because they're just unhappy and they just don't do anything about it, except blame somebody else or I wish. And we have to stop that. You have got God living on the inside of you. You have courage, you have boldness, you have wisdom, and you can have a wonderful, wonderful life. I heard a story just last week, and this is a true story about a young man that graduated from college, and he had studied in a certain field, and he was offered a great job in the field that he had studied in. And it was a good paying job. It was like the perfect job. He was amazed. And of course, he wanted the job. But the closer it got to taking it for some reason that did not make any sense to him at all. He just didn't feel like it was what he was supposed to do. He wanted to, but he didn't feel like it was right. Have you ever had that where you really want to? There's a part of you that wants to, but down deeper, you're just like, and you know, it's actually kind of irritating to us because we don't know why. If God would just tell us why. But I want to do this, and the door's open, and it's gonna be good. And so, why do I feel this way? Well, you know, God knows things that we don't know. Okay, you want to hear the rest of that guy's testimony? 4 months later, the Twin Towers were hit, and that's where his job would have been. You know, sometimes I'll be riding in the car with somebody, and of course I always think I know where I'm going and how they should get there. And I've had occasions where maybe all of a sudden they're going some way that I'm thinking, where in the world are you going? You ever feel like that with God? You think you know where you're going, and then all of a sudden you're like, where in the world were you going? This isn't the way. This isn't the way. And sometimes, so then I'll question the driver, and they'll say, oh, I can see here on my GPS that there's a wreck up ahead. And so it's guiding me to take a different route. You know what GPS is for the believer? God's protection and guidance system. And we've all got a holy GPS on the inside of us, and it's down deep in our spirits. And just like sometimes a good driver will look ahead and see that there's a problem up ahead and take a different route and miss a huge problem, God will guide us many times to take a different route that doesn't make any sense to us because he knows what's up ahead. Let me tell you something. The wisest thing that any one of us can do is learn to pay attention to what's going on deep down inside of us and not just live off the top of our heads or off of our fleshly emotions. I had a situation in this past year where I decided I wanted to move. A couple of my kids were gonna move, and we were gonna get some property, and we were gonna all move on the side. We just had this great plan, you know. Well, Dave never was for it to begin with, and so that should have been a clue right there that it wasn't real good, but you know, I used my female persuasion, and I talked him into it, and Dave's just like, well, you know, I don't want to do that, but I can be happy anywhere. And so, you know, so I got this whole plan going, and I was excited. Can I tell you something? Excitement doesn't equate to it being God's will. And I could have done it. It wasn't that I couldn't have done it, but when I got into it, when the excitement died down, there was no real peace, no real desire. I didn't want the work. I didn't want to mess with it. I didn't have a clue what I wanted to build. Got down to it. I got to look at my house. I thought, why in the world would I want to move? Got a great view, got a good house. Of course, you know Dave, he's like, I told you. You know, I told you. But because I had gotten myself into this, it took me a while to decide to back out. And so finally I just had to say, you know what? I just didn't hear from God. And you know what? Don't ever be the kind of person that won't say, I just didn't hear from God. I made a mistake. I did not hear from God. You and I have to follow the leadership of the Holy Spirit, or we are going to have nothing but misery in our lives. And just because I want something, that doesn't mean it's God guiding me. Now, if we're going to be guided, led by the Holy Spirit.
We hope you enjoyed this teaching. To get more from Joyce, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing.